everyone, I'm Siri Vincent Pluff.
And I'm Cassandra Snow.
And you are listening to Chaos and Cunning,
a DIY witchcraft podcast at the crossroads of magic and daily living.
Hello, Editing Siri here. I wanted to give you all a heads up that we had quite a few audio issues while recording this interview. We tried to fix it in post, but it just wasn't working. As a result, this episode may be triggering for people with migraines or other auditory issues. If you find that you're having issues, please take care of yourself first and foremost. If you would rather read this interview, you can find the full transcript, along with all of our other transcripts, on our Patreon. It is always free and open to the public to read our transcripts. I've included a link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Chaos and Cunning. This is the second interview of the season, and I'm very, very excited about it. If you have never listened to an episode of Chaos and Cunning before, you're in for a treat. I'm very excited for you. This is the podcast where Cassandra Snow and I blend chaos magic and cunning work, and we're also just working professional witches and talk about DIY witchcraft at the crossroads of everyday living. So, Cassandra, who are we interviewing today?
I'm so excited. This is our second interview, our first one with me. We are interviewing Thumper Forge, who I am a huge fan of. Thumper Forge is a Gardnerian high priest, an initiate of the Minoan Brotherhood, a Discordian episcopos, and a notary public from Houston, Texas. Their first book, Virgo Witch, Divining the Details, was co-authored with Ivo Dominguez Jr. and was released by Llewellyn in November 2023. Their latest book, The Chaos Apple, Magic and Discordianism for the Postmodern Witch, was released by Llewellyn in November 2025. By day, Thumper manages a leather and fetish wear shop, and by night they dabble in chaos magic, offer geomantic and lithomantic readings, and blog irreverently for Patheos Pagan. Their essays have previously appeared in The Gorgon's Guide to Magical Resistance and Modern Witchcraft with the Greek Gods, History, Insights, and Magical Practice, also from Llewellyn 2022. So, welcome, Thumper. We're so glad to have you here today.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yay! Your book is so good. We're going to get to the divination corner, but I've read it twice, actually. Once because I thought we were interviewing you last week and then you didn't have power. And then I kind of went back through some of my favorite parts today. I messaged you to tell you how funny it was initially, and then I was like worried that sounded rude. So I was like, no, it's also really good. So, and I think more witchcraft books should make readers laugh this much because it kind of eases you into everything else.
I'm just relieved that I'm glad people are getting things out of it, but I'm also very relieved that people do find it funny because my brand of humor doesn't always translate well, and things that I think are hilarious sometimes cause other people to like smile blankly and run away. So
Same. Yeah. But I think in print it worked really, really well. And I think it is of the books I've read by people I know, I feel like this one is genuinely the one that is the most in your voice. Like I felt like I was having a conversation with you. And in fact, I had so many notes in my marginalia that were literally just me conversating with you.
Incredible.
That's not often the case. So
before we get happy, and I'll write my responses back, and then I'll mail it back to you. It'll be like Mr. Henshaw.
That'll be so fun.
It'll be like the Themsterhood of the traveling book.
I was trying to make that same joke, but could not think of words. I was like, I don't know what to call us. Yeah. But yeah, so we always kick off Chaos and Cunning with the Divination Corner, which you are welcome to participate in, but not obligated. You just will have to listen to Siri and I yap for a minute otherwise. But our Divination Corner, if you're tuning in for the first time, is a little bit different. We're not super interested in forecasting, in part because that is very time constraining. And if you find this podcast in 7 years, great. We want that to still be relevant to you. Instead, we are just looking at something that whenever you listen to this is going to help you with your creative life, and often that sort of goes in tandem with your spiritual life. sort of more advice or prompts for those things. We do have a lot of listeners that like this is their first time exposed to a lot of this stuff. Tell our listeners and viewers a little bit more about what a lithomantic reading is.
So lithomancy is just divination with stones. I take stones, I define stones very loosely. I think it's more like any small objects of roughly the same shape and size. So what I was just throwing on my floor were gaming dice that all have different colors. I don't really look at the numbers. I'm just looking at the colors and the shapes. And I say traditionally very loosely as well. Like throughout specifically Greek mythology, there are moments where people use stones to divine, and there's a whole myth of Apollo learning to divine with pebbles, but we have no real instruction from that. This method was actually devised by Doreen Valiente in 1978 in the book Witchcraft for Tomorrow, where she used 13 stones, 7 of which represent the classical planet, 5 of which represent personal areas of concern, and 1 of which she called the magic stone, I call the indicator. That sort of shows us where the crux of the reading is. Some lithomancers will use 16 stones and they will use the outer planets as well. I don't feel that's very necessary. I think that for me, that gets kind of cluttered, and there's a lot of crossover between the outer planets and the areas of personal concern, just in terms of the meanings of the stone themselves. So I don't worry about it. But if you want to read with all of them, that is, there are no rules. Nothing is set in stone, which is the cheesiest lithomancy joke ever, but that's true. It's very there's an intuitive side to it, where the stones have pretty concrete meanings, but those meanings change and adapt based on how they're interacting with each other and how they're pointing at each other. I have found it to be very accurate. I've also found it to be very cut and dry and no nonsense, which is great for like confirmation type questions or yes no questions. Can be kind of awkward when like I'm working a psychic fair and the person next to me has been talking for 30 minutes and then they're like, so this next card, and I'm like, okay, I've already answered 32 questions. Do you have anything else? I can kind of turn and burn. They're very clear, concise answers, and that's my Virgo-ness really appreciates that. So hopefully that was a good thing.
Absolutely. I also will say too, as a tarot reader, I'm what I say is a career psychic, by which I mean I make money however I need to, and that also means I'm on a couple hotline services. So I get very used to being able to read tarot very cut and dry too, which means when I'm in situations like that, even other tarot readers, I'm like, you're making me look bad. I'm used to people paying $2 a minute and expecting me to keep it at 10 minutes. So yeah, that's really cool.
So y'all can't see it. I'm like looking at this constellation on my living room floor right now. The indicator is the stone that gives us kind of the crux of the reading. And reading the stones around that stone tells us where the emphasis lies. And it is very close to Jupiter and at a distance from Saturn. So overall, we see more favorability than unfavorability, a lot more favorability. In a yes/no question, Jupiter is yes and Saturn is no. So if the indicator lands closer to Jupiter, then we have favorable. If it lands closer to Saturn, we have unfavorable. And in this case, we have a lot of favorability. So in terms of the question of creativity and spirituality, now is a favorable time for these endeavors. Right, on the other side of the indicator, again, right next to it is news. News is, it can be taken literally as like information, but it can also represent commitments, desires, things that we want. So in terms of creativity and spirituality, the focus is going to be on what we want to do in those areas. Like focus less on what we think should happen and more on what do I want to have happen. The moon, which would rule spiritual matters, is still kind of on the favorable side, but it's at a distance, and Venus is fairly close. Venus would be more the arts, specifically like the visual arts, where the moon does have a creative side to it, but it's much more on the spiritual side. So in terms of, if you're looking at a project and thinking, but is this spiritual? This is what I want to create, but am I doing something, where's my spirituality in this project? Don't worry about it. Just do what you want to do with it, and the spirituality will find you later or find its way into the project. And then right in the middle of the reading, again, right next to the indicator, are the sun and love. The sun is victory, success, career, authority, and love can be romantic love, but it can also be things that we love doing. I think in this case, specifically because it's near news, it's going to be what we love doing. But the sun is very healing, and love has a healing aspect to it in terms of like recovery and reconciliation and rest. So as we are focusing on what we want to do, we will see great success, but that's also in terms of what we are capable of doing, knowing our own limits, making sure that we are feeding our art, but we are also not forgetting to eat. like make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as much as we are taking care of the things that we want to do. So that's what I have.
All right. So, Thumper, what brought you to occultism and to chaos magic specifically?
I will keep what brought me to occultism pretty short because I've told this story before on podcasts. So I don't want people to be like, this again. We know. But as a kid, I was raised like devoutly Episcopalian, and I was a good little Episcopalian for a long time. But at some point, I really got interested in Greek mythology and had this like in the back of my head, I was like, can you still do this? Like, do people still? I was like 10, and I was like, can you worship Greek gods? Is that allowed? So that was sort of always kind of floating around the back of my mind. When I was 12 years old, I was flipping through a newspaper and there was a human interest story about a group, a coven of witches going to see the witches of Eastwick. And I feel like it was probably Lori Cabot and it was probably from a wire service that just made it into my hometown newspaper. But I read that and it was like, oh, witches are real. And I announced to my family, I'm going to be a witch. And they were like, no, you're not. Which is funny today. Like, I remember my dad specifically going, I don't think I want you to be a witch. Today, my dad is like, listen, do not give copies of your witchcraft book away. You need to sell those copies. You did not.
My dad's the same way.
Like, my dad is very, and he's still devout Episcopalian, but he was like, you need to market your witchcraft. I'm like, okay, Dad. So clearly he's very supportive. But yeah, that was when I was in middle school. I started like wanting to read books on the occult that were way above my reading level and my comprehension, but I was very interested in it. In college, I heard about Wicca for the first time and started reading about that. And then eventually, everything I was reading about Wicca was like, this is a 10,000-year-old religion that was also invented in 1954. Like, nobody seemed to have any clear understanding of where it actually came from. And so I was like, well, I'm going to find out. And I tracked down a Gardnerian coven and ended up initiated Gardnerian. And once I ended up there, I was like, I'm actually very comfortable here. This all makes sense to me, right? This works for me. And I just did that for a long time. I had a side interest in Discordianism. I had read Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler, her big, opus. And she had interviewed one of the founders of Discordianism. And Eris had always been kind of my favorite Greek goddess. I always saw her as this like wily troublemaker. So to find out that there was a whole religion based on her, even a parody religion, I was like, sign me up. And then years later, a friend of mine randomly, he puts it, I'm into the woo. He's like, I'm kind of woo. And he called one day and said, hey, I'm going to do some woo. Do you want to come over? And I was like, okay. And this is in the introduction of the book. But I come over and like 10 minutes later, I'm like naked on a massage table and I'm wearing these goggles that are flashing lights into my eyes. And there's Hindustani trance music playing in the background. And he's doing energy work over me. And I'm like, tell me again what this is. And he's like, this is chaos magic. And I was like, oh, okay. So I survived. I still had my wits and vision when the whole thing was over. But I started reading, I think he loaned me a copy of Condensed Chaos by Phil Hine. And from there, I read Libernal and Psychonaut by Peter J. Carroll. And then it was just sort of off to the races. And I learned that chaos magic really got going in the 70s in England. But when it crossed over to the US, the Discordians found it. And so there was a lot of crossover between chaos magic and Discordianism. So that was sort of my entry into it.
That's really cool. So that was actually one of my questions that we didn't have written down necessarily, which was as a chaos magic adjacent chaos witch person, I had never heard of Discordianism until I learned about your works. What's the Venn diagram like?
Yeah.
So the Venn diagram is literally Phil Hine, the author Phil Hine, because he was, although he was in England, he in his books incorporated a lot of Discordian ideas into chaos magic. But Discordianism is a parody religion that focuses on Eris, the Greek goddess of discord. And nobody wrote down the actual date, but at some point in the late 50s or very early 60s, these, for lack of a better way of saying it, these two potheads in California decided to start a religion, mainly because one of them, his name was Greg Hill, he had recently learned that there was a Greek goddess of discord, and he thought that was the funniest thing he had ever heard in his life. So he and his best friend, Carrie Thornley, set about creating this religion that was designed to make fun of organized religion. It was never meant to be a serious thing, but it caught on and started kind of having an influence. So the author Robert Anton Wilson was very influenced by Discordianism. There was, I don't know that everybody will be old enough to remember them, but there was a band, a techno band in the late 90s or mid to late 90s called the KLF, who had
Yes.
a few hits. They were a Discordian band. And so all of their names stood for Copyright Liberation Front. And all the lyrics had to do with Robert Anton Wilson's works. And they did these like bizarre publicity stunts because they were just Discordian artists. So Discordianism has had a profound effect on pop culture. It's just nobody realizes it. And then at some point, this was something that came out of Drawing Down the Moon, Kerry Thornley, who changed his name to Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. That was his official Discordian title as a high priest of Eris. Somebody asked him if he really believed that Eris was. He's like, do you, knowing this is a parody religion, do you take it seriously? And his response was, listen, if I knew this was all going to come true, I would have gone with Venus. Because the more people got into Discordianism and the more people took it seriously, the more real it seemed to become as a religion and as a belief system.
It's so fun. I thank you for sharing all of that. That is great. I think Siri and I are also so interested in other people's journeys with chaos magic because for us both, it was more like we were very inspired by how activist oriented the work of Kellyanne Maddox is. And so we started connecting with her work and stuff. And then we were like reading and listening to her talk about chaos magic, and we were both like, wait, that's what we do. Like, what? So we didn't even know we were chaos magicians.
Kellyanne Maddox was the first person I ever heard identify themselves as a chaos witch. And she had a very clear explanation of what that means to her. So when I kind of stumbled into TikTok and there are all these people calling themselves chaos witches, and I was like, oh, wow, a whole section of, a whole demographic of social media who's read the works of Kellyanne Maddox. And very quickly I was like, oh, no, they've all just seen WandaVision. And and that's part of what kind of inspired the book. Me writing a book was like, I want to give them some direction. I want to help them.
Well, and as also a huge WandaVision fan, a lot of those people aren't necessarily wrong, but they don't know why it is chaos magic adjacent. Like they don't know what they're actually like listening to and looking at. And so that's sort of, it's just like a personal pet peeve of mine when people are not like thinking critically and connecting dots, which makes existing on the internet really fun.
I will make this the shortest rant possible. And I grew up reading Marvel Comics. I'm a huge Marvel Comics fan.
Same.
This is one area where I will like die on the hill against Marvel. In the Marvel comic universe, there are two forms of magic: magic for order and magic for chaos. This is incorrect because the opposite of order is not chaos. The opposite of order is disorder. But because the Scarlet Witch's power set eventually got kind of retconned into chaos magic in the late 90s. That's what was used to define, that term was what was used to define her powers in the MCU. And so people who were exposed to the idea of chaos magic through that think of chaos as chaotic and wild and uncontrollable when actual chaos magic is not that at all.
Yeah.
So I get very like, darn you, Marvel, because I feel like
no,
so much of the misunderstanding about chaos magic specifically comes from that.
Well, and that is very frustrating, like online and people who found chaos magic that way. But then, of course, everything gets sort of like diluted the further down the line you go, or diluted the further down the line you go. And so there's also so many people calling themselves chaos witches and magicians who like quite literally don't even know what that is at this point and are like, I'm a chaos witch and I've never heard of WandaVision, but I sure do like to do whatever I want and call it magic. And I'm like, okay, that's a choice.
A lot of people seem to be equating chaos witchcraft with eclectic witchcraft, and they're very two distinct things.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the book, actually, where you kind of go into that, because I also think that eclectic witchcraft has gotten a little bit of a bad reputation, or not even just a bad reputation, just like people get really snobby about eclectic witchcraft. And you don't need to. Eclectic witches can actually be like very good at what they do. They're just, maybe pulling from a variety of traditions. Eclectic witchcraft does not inherently mean that you are practicing cultural appropriation, like all of this stuff. I was just gonna say earlier, so as somebody who's like, Marvel in your practice, stares at the camera and laughs in heathen. Um, which actually, so I'm teaching a class, as of recording, I'm teaching a class this Sunday on runes in pop culture. And so, of course, like I am going to touch on the Thor comics, especially, and I'm going to touch on, like the Loki show. I'm going to touch on Wanda using runes in WandaVision, all of this stuff. Like, it's really interesting, right? And because I'm a theory bro, don't be jealous of me. I'm a theory. Um, that doesn't make any sense. I am gonna approach it from like a literary analysis, like
Yeah.
kind of angle of like this is how we analyze pop culture and literature. So how can we like analyze pop culture in um spirituality? And this is, I promise Cassandra, we will get back to our like written questions. I have another one.
You're talking about, I am super chill and loose and totally fine when people deviate from plans a million times.
So anyway, I actually really wanted to talk to you about the use of pop culture in Guardianism, the use of pop culture in chaos magic in general. I know that like that has been one of the things that some super serious occult bros have against chaos magic is, the utilization of pop culture in magic. Um, and I also sometimes am like, "Oh my god, this is so cringe," but you know what? You do you. I truly like if the cringe makes you happy, go and do the cringe, right? That's how I feel about it. Um, so yeah, like let's just kind of touch on that. Let's riff on that. Like I don't have a question here as much as just like let's talk about this proliferation of especially comic books and seemingly especially Marvel specifically in the MCU.
So I think, I know that there are the super serious occult bros who, and not even just the occult bros, sometimes just the super serious like witch talkers or the super serious Instagram
Yeah.
get really take a lot of affront to the idea of pop culture magic or pop culture deities without realizing how profoundly pop culture has always influenced the occult. Like the reason why so many non-Wiccan witches refer to their personal journals and grimoires as books of shadows is because of the show Charmed, right? That Charmed came out of Wicca, but it didn't go, it's not like filtered into great general paganism through Wicca. It was the term picked up by a television show that went on to somebody else. When you mentioned Loki, and I'm gonna grab, hang on,
So
I'm gonna
excited.
bring Loki over here. I'm gonna bring my Loki.
Hi,
Gonna sit over here.
bestie.
He's gonna hang out with us. He a lot of Lokian specifically, but you see it just kind of in general heathenry, which I'm kind of on the fringes of. A lot of offering bowls to Loki or symbology around Loki in green and gold, which comes directly from Marvel Comics. And people will say, a comic book MCU Loki, no, that's not correct. That's not who Loki is. And I'm like, you are literally praying to a green and gold statue. You know, um,
Yeah.
I think just chaos magic, I think, is a lot more just, I hate to use the word honest, but it's like we're bringing in the pop culture influences on purpose versus letting pop culture influence and not being aware of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, and I have kind of two thoughts on this. And one is that I can't criticize because I found witchcraft through Buffy, and I'm not gonna lie. That was my in. And I sort of like over identified with both Willow and Oz anyway growing up. And so also early like non-binary seeds when Willow like quote unquote became a lesbian. So I have no room to speak. If that's how the kids are finding it now, so be it. And then to me it's more like what do you do with that? Once a seed is planted, where do you go and what do you do? If I left my occult knowledge in the hands of Willow Rosenberg and did none of my own research or like experimenting or anything, like that would be ridiculous. But whatever you're in is, it is. But the other thing I feel strongly, and this is like a more serious point, is that whenever people are it almost is like they think their witchcraft is too good to be tarnished by pop culture. It's like A, the occult version of I'm not like other girls, and then B, it's very much like, I think it's the difference in people who think that the goal of witchcraft is to transcend this world and people who think that the goal of witchcraft is to make this world better. And so if you're incorporating pop culture and stuff, I think you're more likely to be someone who realizes that as witches, we exist in the world. And so therefore we need to be very aware of what is going on in the world on a lot of different levels. So those are sort of my thoughts on that.
I also think that humor doesn't make things less spiritual. And that is actually something that I think that, I don't know. I mean, it's probably always kind of been there, right? But I feel like having started my witchcraft journey before social media, before I had any social media.
Same, thank goodness.
Right. Yeah. And like having started it in that era that was just before social media, um, I think that there's a lot of like, fear of looking silly or fear of, you know, um, I hate to say it, but like not being able to commodify yourself and your experiences, not being able to appropriately um like have the beautiful Instagram feed or, the super informative TikTok feed or whatever. And it was also something that I did in person with other people who got me. So of course we were joking before we entered circle. Of course we were doing all of this stuff, right? Like there was a kind of levity there because the end goal was not professionalization. And I think that for a lot of people today, like, they're seeing their favorite influencers becoming authors, they're seeing their favorite influencers, starting occult shops or whatever, and people are like, "This person that I deeply respect and look up to is a professional, so therefore that's my ultimate spiritual goal," and it doesn't have to be. I'm not saying that, like, we don't need that many professional witches in the world, because far be it for me to set that or whatever, but, like,
Well, and we do, but you need to know enough to actually do that. And so
I
being
think.
right.
closed off.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
You're fine. I already forgot.
I started my witchcraft journey before the onset of social media, right? And like I found Wicca and witchcraft, like really got into it and was actively practicing like a year before the movie The Craft came. So that movie was awesome for me. It was very validating, right? And the aesthetic was spot on.
It's still one of my favorites.
But when you're talking about people who get their start through social media, or who discover witchcraft through Instagram or TikTok or whatever, there is very much this idea of how does my witchcraft appear to everyone else? I want my witchcraft to be palatable. I want my witchcraft to be accepted. And I know that, back in the Stone Age when I started, I went into it with the idea of, or the understanding that I'm not going to care what anybody thinks about this. And the very first time I did like a witchcraft anything, like really took it seriously, doing a ritual to non-Christian deities on this tiny little balcony off my bedroom with a stick of sandalwood incense that I got at a head shop and some candle holders from Pier 1. I had this moment. I was about to light these candles and start this little mini ritual. And I thought, if you're wrong, you are in fact going to hell. And I did it anyway.
That was a very similar thing. I came from an evangelical upbringing. And I still was like, well, and I will say I was very traumatized. I was at the point of like, if this doesn't work, you're going to hell and everything is still horrible. But if it works, then everything won't be terrible. So who cares? And then it worked. So
I will say my very first one didn't really work. Because I've learned over, it was, I was like 19 and I was going to cast a love spell and I was going to bring love and it didn't work. I just learned that like, I'm just not great at love spells. That is not my forte. It's what I ended up learning from that experience. But I also so I think you probably had a very similar experience to me in that, this was not about what anybody else thought. It was about what I wanted. Right. And so when we compare that to kids today who are very much still worried about how are people with more followers than I have going to react to my witchcraft. how do I get that person to like me? How do I get that person to acknowledge or validate me? To me, that detracts from witchcraft. Like, if
Yes.
I'm caught up in that, then I feel like I wouldn't be as much of a witch if that was what my focus was.
Yeah,
Well, and for me
absolutely.
too, I don't know. I say all of that to say I have always cared so deeply what people think about me, and it has never impacted my behavior at all because I don't know how to do anything else. Like, I am like, people might not like this, but what are my other options? Like, I just don't know.
And that was something that I've always struggled with in the real world. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do I set aside the need for approval? How do I set aside wanting to fit in and belong and all these things? And then, when I found places where I was accepted and did fit in, then it was less of a worry. But I just never had that same worry online. Like,
Right.
if somebody doesn't like my content, I'm like, okay, I don't care. A lot of what got me to stop caring about what people thought, specifically online, was when I started blogging for Patheos Pagan. I wrote a few blog entries and they were well received. And so I wrote one about Wicca, and oh my, people just came for me in the comments and on Facebook. I was just like really taken aback by not only how many mean comments there were, but just how mean the comments were. Right.
Yeah.
And people who, like, this one person left this very long comment on Facebook, on the Patheos Pagan Facebook page, about how awful I personally am. And then they went to my blog and copied and pasted because they wanted me to know just how awful I was. Is it okay to curse on here?
Of course.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because what really did it was I wrote a blog post about my Minoan growth. The Minoan brother is one of the things that three of us went to a Greek festival, and I found this little plaque of little stones glued together that was supposed to be the Virgin Mary, but it kind of looked like Rhea stealing Zeus away from Kronos. And it really looked like Princess Leia giving information to R2D2. And I fell in love with it. And I wrote a story about that for the blog. And the first comment was, great story. And the second comment was, this is fucking disgusting.
So I will say something that began to break me of caring. It did take me a little longer, was when Queering the Tarot came out, I got two very specific pieces of feedback. One was, I absolutely love that you told about some of the cards together so that we could sort of zoom out and see the whole of the story Tarot was telling. And the other comment that I got the most was, I actually hated that you did not get every card its own page. And seeing that it was literally like half and half, my brain was like, and I will say, for me, when we talked about supportive dads, Siri also has an incredibly supportive dad who is usually like sitting beside me at book events and stuff, and it's very cute. But I was really upset about a really awful video that is still up on YouTube that claims I told people they could diagnose themselves with tarot cards in Queering the Tarot, which I did not do. And I told my dad about it, and I was really upset. And I think that one upset me so much because it wasn't like an opinion. It was someone like willfully misunderstanding and misrepresenting me. And my dad just kind of shrugged and went, "Where's her book?" And I was like... And I was like, "Dad, that's so mean." And he was like, "It's not mean, it's the truth."
I mean, if it's true. Not mean if it's true.
Yeah.
I felt like because I was getting and I was getting some good comments as well. Like, some people like what I had to say. But I realized that people were going to get angry about whatever I said, regardless of what I said. And I started putting Wicca in the title of blog posts, even if the blog post really wasn't about Wicca, just to get people upset. And I wrote a couple of blog posts in a row about, like, in defense of Wicca. And so people in the comments were just losing their minds. And then I put out a post that was called "The Wiccan Who Was Mean to Me." And it was all about how and people in the comments got so angry that I was saying something negative about a Wiccan after I had just been defending it, even though they were pissed off that I was defending it. And I was like, this is so entertaining to me. Like, this is so much more fun than giving a shit what any of these people think.
So I was extremely shaken up by some events that happened last year where my work was written about in detail in the book Pagan Threat. And honestly, I was just very scared. I was like, are these people going to come after me? And again, yeah, my dad was like, I think you should just change your branding. I think everything should be Pagan Threat from now on. And so, like, that kind of... And I'm like considering it. Siri can tell you I have since designed a like t-shirts in an extremely girly pop looking font that say pagan threat that I'm like genuinely considering making and putting on Redbubble or something. And so
absolutely buy that shirt.
Yeah. But yeah.
I was sort of infuriated with the pagan community as a whole with how much attention we were bringing to that book. I was like, we're kind of doing the marketing for them, and I'm not okay with that.
I mean, let's be honest, the book is crap, and what did the marketing for them was the fact that a certain forward writer had died. But yeah.
Yeah, that his untimely demise was right before the book came out, so that did add some put a spotlight on it. But yeah, but there were a couple of people mentioned specifically in the book, and I think I don't know where I found the PDF of it. I think somebody posted a link to it, and I was like, I might as well read this. And I was very shocked to see your name in there.
Well, and my dad read it too and was like, I mean, you said those things, but you were right. So
I think they're probably they're gonna fight about who has the most pagan kid.
Yeah. So getting back into the interview, though this is all gold and will probably all get used, even if we have to break this up into two. But the next one is actually sort of more about the focus of Chaos and Cunning as a podcast, which is not so much about holding quote unquote contrasting spiritual beliefs and like more the synthesis of those, but very much like this is a podcast for the busy witch, the witch with jobs, the witch with kids, the occultist who is a published author, but also has a 9 to 5, whatever. And so with that, you're a pretty busy person. You do so much in this community. You also have a day job at the fetish shop. How do you balance it all? And what does sustainability in your practice look like for you?
For me, a lot of it has to do with simplicity and consistency.
Yeah.
I set my alarm with the absolute intention of hopping out of bed and a cartoon bluebird lands on my finger and I whisk off to the shower and then there's like a 1980s fashion montage of me trying on outfits and then I show up at work 30 minutes early. This will happen. Stumble out of bed, I go have a cigarette, I get back in bed, I make a cup of coffee. I'm going to play one game of Royal Match, and then 27 games later, I'm like, ooh, how did this happen, right? Like, why do I have now?
This is so familiar to me.
So time management is not my strong suit, but at the same time, I still have daily ritual things that I do. I have weekly devotional things that I do. And so for me, it is all about keeping them simple enough to where I don't dread doing them, but also simple enough to where I know that I can continue to,
For listeners, can you give an example? It's fine if not, but
so just as my standard issue, it's like last thing I do before I leave for work. It's usually after like I get out of the shower and then I just head over to the altar. Within 12-step recovery, there's the Serenity prayer that I think everybody's familiar with. And then there's also a 3rd-step prayer and a 7th-step prayer. I've been sober for a while, so I have a lot of random step prayers stuck in my head. But I will
all sober as well, so I get it.
So I will just kind of address the deities to whom I have devotional relationships, and then just say the Serenity prayer. And then I've got a little side altar to Eris, there's an organization called the Fellowship of Isis, and I kind of use their daily blessing, which is just sort of blessing the body before you go on with your day. And the whole thing is, a couple minutes tops, but it's also, so the upside to that is, I can do it very quickly even when I'm running late. But the other side of it is I have no excuse not to do it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, I only have 20 minutes to get to work. Well, no, you have 19 minutes to get to work. Just go say your prayer. And so consistency is what helps develop those devotional relationships to where when I do need to buckle down and do real spell work, or when I really do need to like petition the gods for something, I've already been having a conversation with them.
Yeah. Siri, you should segue into the next one.
Yeah. So what are some unexpected intersections between working at the shop and your witchcraft practice? How do these intersections impact your practice?
The job itself, it's a leather and fetish shop that I just sort of fell into managing. So I've been working in a like dead-end corporate job, and that didn't work out. I was kind of drifting, and a friend of mine was opening a business, and I just ended up there. And it was one of the like I'll do this for a little while until something better comes along, and I've been there for 4 years. I work by myself a lot of the time, which means that if I need to do spell work or if I have an idea of something I want to do, I have the time, I have the space to do it and the privacy to do it. But because so many of my customers know me either in real life or have like seen me on TikTok or whatever, I end up doing like just a lot of readings in the store, like,
Cool. Yeah.
and I'm sitting on the floor with another customer throwing rocks on the ground, and it's just become kind of part of life at the store. I've got
I love that.
who kind of set me down one time, and they were like, "We haven't seen you do a reading in a while." And they're like, "You still do readings, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "But you haven't been doing them here." And I was like, "Well, I just haven't had a reason to do them here." And they're like, "Is everything okay at home?" It's like that around the store, that when I didn't, they worried about me. So that's really, for me, it's sort of the synthesis, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sort of I am the spicy shop witch, I guess. Like, people just, my friends are used to me doing all these things. And so it's just all sort of come together as just part of my overall identity.
Love that. I think a specific question I have, sort of piggybacking on that, is going the other way. Has your life in leather and fetish community impacted your spiritual practice? Is there anything like just fun and spicy you want to talk about?
Actually, it's kind of the opposite. Uh,
Yeah.
so I I got involved with the local leather community specifically because people told me not to. I had people around me who were like, "That's a bad idea, and that will compromise your sobriety." And I was like, "Well, now that you've told me not to do it, now I have to." But I had gone to any number of pagan gatherings by that point. So you go to the campground, you don't expect to see boobs. There are boobs, right? Like, there's a lot of clothing options. But also, I come out of the Gardnerian tradition, which practices ritual, which got me very comfortable with myself. Like, if I'm trying to think of like kind of like the polite way to say this, I guess. If you're when you become part of an initiatory tradition, especially one that does practice things like the skyclad, it could be kind of jarring at first to just like you're sitting in somebody's naked living room naked with these other people, and it just becomes very non-issue very quickly, and that led to nudity itself not automatically equating to sexuality.
Okay.
But it also got me very comfortable with my own body. Because there's like, I've got some stuff down here that I would rather have up here, and
Yeah.
I've got the little flab under the arms and little things that always made me very uncomfortable, especially when I was out and about around other gay people, like, worried about, do I look as good as everybody else? And
Mm-hmm.
they judging me for how I look. But after spending a few years dancing around naked in living rooms, like, that just didn't bother me. So I was a lot more comfortable throwing on a harness and going to a leather event, or, not
Mm-hmm.
wearing a shirt or just wearing a leather vest. I just was much more comfortable and confident. And that made me much more comfortable and confident in the leather community where other people weren't. But the benefit of that was then I could take my comfort and leverage it to help other people find their comfort.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of when people ask for like not initiatory, but initial steps into glamour magic. One of the first things I say that really throws them is just sleep naked. Like, unless it is way too cold to, but that is one of the best ways and sleep naked. And then I would say a very aggressive step two is putting a full length mirror in your room, because then you just really get desensitized to it and you even start to love it. Like, that body becomes equated with like comfort as much as anything else. And so,
The important lesson many years ago, I started dating someone who I saw as very out of my league. I had no idea why he was interested in me, and I was trying to just accept it. But I was very insecure. The whole time we were together, whenever I would like look in the mirror, I'd be like, okay, I'm not bad looking. I can kind of see why he thinks I'm attractive. And then we broke up, and I looked in the mirror and I was like, I am a fucking troll. I am hideous. I am unworthy. This is obviously why he didn't want to be with me. And once I fully recovered from the breakup, I was like, you didn't have a problem with how you looked when you were happy. When you were unhappy, suddenly you didn't like how you looked. And so I've always just kind of kept that in mind, that how much my emotional state affected how I physically perceived myself.
so important to name. I do want the listeners to just hear that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to name as well. I don't have a thought about this because I have too many thoughts about this specifically. So something that not everyone will know about me is that I actually did go through eating disorder recovery. Like that was really hard, and a lot of the stuff that was really challenging about that was actually so much of the body positive movement was really focused on femininity, and as a non-binary person, so that was just not clicking. Yeah, I think that that's one place where glamour magic has been really helpful for me is in kind of integrating aspects of that because it's like when I'm in trance or when I'm putting the glamour on, like I can choose to look however I want. And that can change, right? And yeah. I'm sorry, like I feel like my brain is like melting out of my ear right now. So like I don't have an
We are
actual
also like really we're past the point where Siri begins turning into a pumpkin. This is very much a night owl morning bird friendship, so we have like a really good time in the afternoon when we hang out.
to be clear, my body has recently so like to be clear, when Cassandra says that I'm a morning bird, my body has decided the ideal wake up time is 3 a.m.
I'm going to bed.
Yeah. So like I've actually been working since like 6 a.m.
Where I had to be at the office at 5:30 a.m. Like we had very staggered shifts in this particular environment. We had an international client base, and that messed me up for years. Where um, just even after I stopped working there at 9 o'clock on a Friday, I was like, I hope nobody expects me to go have fun. Like my body would just turn off. I was so used to popping awake at 4:30 that I can't. It's just even today, I can't sleep in like I used to be able to because I'm just so conditioned to have to be awake by a certain time.
Yeah.
So grateful my child sleeps until 9 or 10 in the morning. Like, I don't know that this would be a tenable lifestyle for me otherwise. But she's very much, but it's because too my co-parent is a professional GM and used to only have games at night. And so I would let her stay up because she wouldn't want to go to sleep until she saw mama. And so, but I'm grateful because as the one who is now the morning parent, I'm like, thank you for letting me sleep.
Man.
We've covered a lot of stuff, so I wanted Siri to just roll with it if she has anything she specifically wants to know.
I feel like the thing that I really wanted to talk about honestly was pop culture stuff, and we already have. Like I think especially just, because it's so funny because, talking to you right now and having just read that section or parts of the book where you cover that. And then also I'm pulling together slides for this lecture this weekend. Yeah, like that's really been on my mind lately. And I don't know, I always really appreciate talking to people who are bigger deals on social media than I ever have been or desire to be about the
I never set out to have the follower base that I have. And
Mhm.
I constantly remind myself, like whenever I start feeling a little kind of big for my britches, well, I have this many followers. I just go watch the content of people with like 1.5 million followers or 4 million followers. I'm like, you have nothing.
right. Yeah. I'm doing an experiment right now that I'm going to fully keep doing for the rest of my life. I have a dumb phone now. And that does not mean that I'm not on social media at all. It just means that my time on social media is very planned. It is structured because I have to either do it on my iPad, which is not super fun. Like, have you ever tried going on the Instagram app on an iPad? Like, it is not enjoyable. Or, like, I did it at a time, like, when I had paid off my last smartphone. So I'll, like, dig my smartphone out of a drawer, turn it on, and, like, scroll on Instagram for 15 minutes or something like that. And it's been so good for me. Like, I feel so much more creative and so much more, like, even my magical practice. And I think I was getting in my head as somebody who's, like, less than 4,000 followers on every single social media. Like, I was getting so in my head about, "Oh, well, you're a public witch, you're a professional witch, like, your magic has to look a certain way, you have to do certain things," and now I'm just kind of like, "Fuck that." Like, "No, I don't, actually." And I don't know, I just really appreciated talking to you about that because I think that, like, the little glass boxes that we stare into for hours a day have really just changed our brains.
Well, and this is go ahead.
Social media platforms have between 1,000 and 3,000 followers. That's after like years and years of posting stuff and not necessarily trying to build a base, just following a lot of people, and a lot of people follow me back, and just, making a lot of friends through writing and stuff like that. It's really only on TikTok that I have this sort of unreasonably large following. And it, in some ways, it's great because when the book came out, there were, I could tell a large number of people, hey, this is this new book and this is where you can find it, right? Like I was able to actually have a louder voice. But it can get so stressful with, like, I'll make a video and I'll be like, okay, that's, okay, it got 200 likes, neat. People like, but every once in a while, especially when I make spicy shop content, I'll watch the numbers and I'm like, oh wow, it got 1,000 views really quickly. Oh wow, it got 5,000. Oh, it's got 100,000 views. That, with TikTok specifically, if a video gets, want to say, somewhere between 30,000 and 300,000, but I think it's 30,000 that the problems start. Once it starts getting shared a lot, that's when the algorithm will start recommending it to people who aren't necessarily interested in what you have to say. But like if 200 people who are all mutuals with this one person share the video, the algorithm is going to show it to all of that person's friends. It's just going to be like it spreads out of containment. So that's when you start getting the seeing this. Why is there a gay person on my FYP? Why is there a pagan on my FYP? Usually, once if a video hits like 100,000, I just automatically turn off the comments. I'm just like, I don't want to know. I don't want to. And when people get in arguments, not mad at me, just like they will get mad at each other. And I'm like, or they will recently, and if they're listening, oh, sorry, I'm talking about you, but somebody really wanted me to know that a creator I mentioned is problematic. They're not. But there was a huge battle in the comments, and I just deleted that whole thread, which brought people back in. Well, my comment mysteriously disappeared, so I'm here to say, I'm like, well, keep
like, take a hint, yo.
Yeah, and I mean, also, like, RIP your notifications too. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I cannot deal with, like, that shit. And this is why Dumb Phone Life is agreeing with me, right? I log in. What?
But I'm interrupted. I'm sorry. I said I have all notifications turned off. I find out if people are pissed off at me on TikTok whenever I get around to opening the app.
I mean, I did that too, but it's just like opening the app and seeing even 10 notifications. I would go through this immediate cycle of like, oh my God, everybody hates me. I'm being canceled. Like, oh my God, which was never true. It was my friends liking my videos.
So
when I first found Witch Talk, I was like, I'm gonna do these hot takes. I'm gonna get canceled. I can't wait. And I would say something that I thought was so controversial, and I was like, yeah, bring it. And then the comments would start rolling in. Oh, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Thank you for sharing that. That was really clear. And I was like, and then I would just say the most innocuous thing, and people would be like, oh, it's because you're Wiccan, right? And I'm like, why? Well, as to what going to set people, and I have learned, I used to dabble in the drama a little bit when I was first on there, just to like poke, like, because I thought it was kind of fun. And very quickly I learned this is not worth it at all. I just now just post what I want to post, and if people like it, that's cool, and if they don't, that's fine.
Going back to Siri's point about pop culture, I wanted to sort of segue into talking about The Chaos Apple, your incredible book. So I love how the pop culture through line is very accessible, but also so sort of occult oriented and based. And I love that, like, there's a section about Bring It On. And I was like, yes, I grew up gay. Of course I know Bring It On. And I feel like Bring It On is one of the, like, regardless of which type of queer you are, if you are of the generation that it was for, that was a formative movie for you. I think it's a great connector in that way.
And I say this in the book, but I really feel like whenever there's all this discourse around the idea of cultural appropriation, people Bring It On understand what cultural appropriation is.
Yes.
Bring It On have no concept of cultural appropriation. In that movie,
But another comment I made that I think something that is just so cool about occultism, and I think one of the reasons I personally side-eye people who want pop culture out of occultism is like, if so much of the point is that everything is connected, why are we disconnecting threads because they're not cool or whatever? That just doesn't make sense to me. So something else I just thought was fun and nice was in your section on Thetis and Peleus, I at the bottom just wrote a note that said, "Hey, that's Sleeping Beauty," when you were talking about like the original snub. And so I just think that that is really cool. And I was like, even the Grimm brothers were doing it.
The reason we think of the apple coming, the fruit of knowledge in the Garden of Eden being the apple, is because when John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, he specifically used an apple because of the wedding of Thetis. Because prior to
Yep.
Paradise Lost, the fruit of knowledge was a fig. It was be a fig. But Milton was influenced by Greek mythology. Like if we think of myths as being like the pop culture of the day, right? The stories and entertainments of the day, that pop culture was still having an effect on belief and magical practice.
Absolutely.
And I told the story specifically of the Roman puppet god. How's that for a teaser? For like, what? Buy the book, you'll find out about the Roman god. But it was, people were literally constructing gods, right? They were like, sometimes not just like I'm believing in this god. It's like I literally built this out of a sock, right? And the fame with which certain prophets or priests gained some of their notoriety really would be the equivalent of pop culture today.
Well, and when you think about, when you start thinking about things through a chaos magician or chaos witch lens, it's also like you can't unsee connections and stuff, because I was thinking about a tweet I've been thinking about not a tweet, it was on Threads. So a thread that tweets don't exist anymore, but whatever. It's the one time I'm okay with dead naming. But yeah, there was a thread that was like, of course the Academy was racist to sinners. Of course Timothy Chalamet has bad opinions about opera and ballet. The only art that has ever been truly for the people is puppetry, and I will not be taking further questions. So you're saying that? And I was like, oh my God, they're right though. And I say that as a lifelong puppet fan, but you're saying that and I'm like, oh, so I could work with that god as like a god of the people. Like that's like a populist god. I mean, populist is going to get a bad rep right now for good reason, but
such a tangent. Can I just say something about Sinners real quick that I keep meaning to say and I keep forgetting to say it? And if I now, I will say it in 10 years and people will be like, that movie hasn't been relevant forever. So people have been arguing why the vampire was Irish. And I had an epiphany. So the old slave patrols became the modern day, like evolved into the law enforcement, right? And when Italian, and specifically Italian, sometimes Polish, and definitely Irish immigrants would come over, they were not allowed to participate in whiteness, right? They were still seen. But a real easy way for specifically Italian and Irish people, men, to participate in whiteness was to become cops, or was a cop. That's why he went immediately to turn the two Klansmen, or the two racist people. He incorporated them first because that was the Irish immigrant integrating into whiteness, specifically racist whiteness, as being part of the police force, and then going out to capture the black. And I just had to into the world because I've not seen that said, and I keep forgetting to say it.
Well, and I did post a TikTok about this earlier, but since we're talking about pop culture and magic and stuff, I made a TikTok that was like, so while Sinners was the superior film, even from a filmmaking perspective, a lot of the reason the Academy wasn't going to recognize it is because so much of what makes Sinners special is the impact it is going to have on both culture and filmmaking for years to come, and you can't measure that in less than a year. And so of course, the Academy is going to be short-sighted about it. And in 3 years, when everyone is trying to make that gorgeous musical scene from Sinners again, people are going to be like, oh, wow, I really wasted my vote on this other movie.
More than this, but there was a big dust-up on Witch Talk a few months ago about MAGA witches, because some our more idealistic brethren learned for the first time that people with views also practice witchcraft, and it became for lack of a better way of saying it, it became kind of a witch hunt to try to figure out who the MAGA witches are. And a friend of mine got kind of like, people were like, he's the MAGA witch. And it was more than anything because he has a Southern accent, right? But, and again, normally I am far more nuanced, but people are like, he's MAGA. And I'm like, he likes sinners way too much.
Yep. I think, yeah. Oh my God. I think the other thing about Sinners that is the reason why it didn't do as well as I would argue it should have at the Oscars is that people are so pissed off at Ryan Coogler for the way that he handled rights to the film. And the Academy is fully complicit in that structure. And so, of course, they're going to be like, we don't want this to be successful. And yet it was nominated for something like 16 awards. I saw an article, I saw a headline today that was grossly misrepresenting what happened that basically said, like, Sinners loses the most Oscars in history. And I'm like, yeah, but it was also nominated for 16. So, like, that, what a way to say that.
That's kind of, welcome to the racism inherent in media, because it was nominated.
Yeah, for sure.
I was very happy that it got the awards that it did, get the recognition. And it wasn't like, my concern was that it was going to win like best lighting or something.
Yeah.
Right. But they recognized Michael Jordan, which was, I did not realize when I watched the movie. I was like, wow, those actors sure look alike. It did not click it.
It's like watching Orphan Black for the first time. Like, you forget that you're just watching the same woman 9 times.
But I I started watching that movie and I was like, this is pretty good. And then there was the dance sequence and I was like, well, Preacher Boy is my new god now. And and like everything, it just made so much sense and it was so beautifully done. But the day after the Oscars, first video I see on TikTok is the alleged MAGA witch posting about, I'm glad Sinners won what it did. Should have gotten more, but it got some recognition. And that's like, sometimes like, I'm taking the win. And I was like immediately reposting it. Like, not a MAGA witch, like Sinners too much.
So one other thing, I think, Siri, this is the one you wanted to make sure I got to.
Just wanted, because you put your name in parentheses. So I wanted to save it
covered
for
that
you.
Already. Yeah.
You're good.
I feel like Thumper covered that for us in the beginning. And we're way past y'all's bedtimes.
Yeah, I'm very
But
sleepy.
Thumper, if you want to talk more specifically about your practice with Eros, and I spelled it wrong, Eris and Discordianism, different Eros is what I wrote in the question. But for those who may not know, what does that type of Discordian magic and that kind of deity work mean to and look like for you? And again, a major point of this podcast, how do you balance Discordianism with all of these other beautiful aspects of your practice? What does sort of that synthesization look like?
And this is something I've been thinking about a lot, some upcoming projects that I'm working on. But a lot of times when bad stuff happens to everybody, right? Like, we don't always have a great day.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a tragedy, sometimes there is, a health concern, whatever it is. And so often when something bad happens to me personally, somebody says, well, you do worship Eris, that's kind of what you get. The perception of Eris is, and it's because of, again, pop culture, because when she's represented in film or television, she's usually the villain, right? Like in The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, or the Sinbad and the Seven Seas movie, or even when she appeared on the Harley Quinn cartoon.
Yeah.
A funny villain, but still the villain. So people are like,
still a Pitch Perfect show, but you're not wrong.
It's this idea that she's this goddess of discord, so therefore she is causing the discord in your life. And it's like, and I'm thinking specifically of this time that my apartment complex accidentally towed my car out of my parking spot. It was a misunderstanding. It happened over Memorial Day weekend, so I couldn't get in touch with anybody for 3 days. But a friend of mine was like, oh, that's Eris, huh? And I was like, no, that's not Eris. Eris is when I was walking through the apartment complex and some random woman stopped me and said, do you like Vietnamese food? And I said, yeah. And she said, I'm a DoorDasher, and I pulled up and they canceled the order as I was pulling up. Here's $6 for free Vietnamese food. And she drove off. That was Eris, right? That was weird. And it's the weirdness, the delightful weirdness that comes from Eris. Because even in Greek mythology, she was perceived as a troublemaker. But, the whole thing with her stories and her myths, as long as you don't make a really selfish decision, things will work out. Everything about the wedding of Thetis, if anyone along the way had made a different, less self-centered decision, the Trojan would have been it, right? And then through Discordianism, she's not what is, she just kind of wants what she wants when she wants it. The Principia Discordia, the Holy Book of Discordianism, describes her as kind of laid back, bitchy at times, but who isn't, right? But there's a story that I do tell in the book about, I needed to turn in a proposal to write the Chaos Act, and I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off, and I kept blogging. I was writing a lot, but I just wasn't working on the proposal. And then one day my blog broke. So I wrote the proposal and submitted it, and then my blog started working. It was down to like I was emailing and saying what's going on, and they were like, there is an issue that is only affecting your blog. The 100 blogs we have are fine. Your blog is messed up. We don't know why.
Yeah.
And as soon as I submitted the proposal, it started working again. So she wanted me to write the book, right? Maybe not necessarily for her, but I said I was going to do it. So she was like, well, then you're going to do it, aren't you? That's Eris, right? Now, in terms of how I balance.
It's very similar to, yeah. I was just going to say that's very similar to my relationship with the Fae and people's perception of what that is versus what it actually is. And Witch Talk has done a lot of damage for people who work with the Fae. Like, when I was coming into witchcraft, fairy witchcraft was one of the main things trending. And so it's sort of what I got into. And it's not that they don't cause trouble in my home, but it's manageable trouble. And it's usually like, hey, pay attention to me trouble. And so, yeah, no, I super relate to that. At the same time, everyone is like, why do you always get these cool, weird, spooky stories? And I'm like, probably because of the Fae you're afraid of.
It's kind of funny. I've been thinking a lot lately about the trends in witchcraft, and even before social media, there were trends, right?
Yeah.
Like Fae and sort of by extension Celtic magic was really in when I was getting started.
Yeah. But yeah, what were you gonna say next about Eris, Thumper?
I think part of my perception of Eris comes from a novel called Callisti, A Discordian Tale. And it's this short little self-published book or independently published book. And it's just this quaint tale of Eris waking up one day, kind of coming out of hibernation, basically, and the golden apple is missing. So she goes on this quest through modern day Greece to find her apple, and she just meets random people along the way, and they become this little traveling merry band trying to get the apple back. But throughout the novel, something will happen, or people they'll hit a kind of conundrum, and everybody's like, what are we going to do? And Eris says, oh, well, I'll do something. They're like, okay. She snaps her fingers, and they're like, okay, what happens now? And she goes, I don't know, something will. And things usually work out just in very unexpected, bizarre ways. And for me, that is a reason. That is Eris.
I love that.
How I balance it all is that's sort of where the chaos magic comes in, because so much of chaos magic is that idea of paradigm shifting, of changing our beliefs based on whatever work we're trying to accomplish. So when I get together with my Gardnerian coven and we're doing our rituals, I'm focused on that, and I'm not thinking about Eris. It's not that she stops existing. It's just that I'm in a different paradigm, right? That's not a Discordian belief system. And I think it's something that for me is very easy to do. But it's something that also had to be learned.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to shift the perception and shift the beliefs. And it's not that I couldn't bring up Eris in the middle of a Gardnerian ritual and start talking about her. It wouldn't serve a purpose. And be relevant to whatever work we were trying to do. So I'm going to be praying to different gods in that situation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think sometimes with the eclectic mindset or in greater paganism, there is this idea that it all has to come together all the time, and we get that, well, all gods are one god and all goddesses are one goddess, and it's all kind of the same thing. And it doesn't have to, we can be selective with what we're choosing to believe at any given time.
Yeah.
So as we're winding down, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the Chaos Apple, which is your book, first ever Chaos and Cunning book giveaway. The details for that will be on our Chaos and Cunning Instagram. Cassandra is putting that together. You will need to be following us, though, in order to be entered to win it. So what are you doing here? Go follow us on socials.
Wanted to give a special shout out to Marcus over at Llewellyn for being so kind to send not only Siri, who asked for a copy of the book, but also me, who had bought one with my real money. And so that's how we're able to do the giveaway. So thank you very much, Marcus.
So, what do you want to tell people about the book? Why should people be hyped for your book? I mean, we've had a great conversation, so I think they obviously should be hyped, but,
I think what I would want people to get out of the book is I would want them to see it less as an instruction manual and more as like guidelines and suggestions. It's the book is full of stuff that has worked for me, and which is great. Um, and maybe it's going to work for everyone else. Maybe some of the things that I pitch in the book or describe in the book will require some tweaking. I think about it in terms of there is a cookbook called A Man, a Can, a Plan. And it's these recipes for like guys who can't cook. And side note, my family years ago had a cooking intervention for me. So they gave me a man, a can, a plan and how to boil water. And they were like, you will learn how to cook. But the recipes in this book, I tried some of them and they weren't bad, but all of them required they almost worked but didn't quite. Like they're like, oh man, if I had made this with 2 eggs instead of 1 egg, that would have actually I bet that would have been better binding agent. Or, it says use canned chicken. I'm gonna get some chicken breasts and see what happens. And because the recipes were so flexible, I was able to actually learn how to cook a little bit. I used the book as a jumping off, but was able to figure out how to do stuff on my own because I had a really encouraging book to work from. And that's what I would want people to get out of my book is that, definitely try the techniques, try the spells, try whatever's in there that you want to give a shot to. But, don't be afraid to make it your own. Don't be afraid to, we get into the bean soup sometimes on TikTok where well, what if I don't like beans when I'm watching a recipe of bean soup? With the chaos apple, if you don't like the beans, you don't have to use the beans. You can do whatever you want. I think of the book as sort of more of a permission slip than anything else. Like,
I love that.
have fun with magic, try different things. Here's one way of doing it. What are you going to do to make this your own? What can you do to improve on what I've put out there? That's what I would hope people get out of it is that they can use it to jump off and do other things with it.
Absolutely. I love that. Before Siri fully passes out, let's go into our last segment of the show, which is what chaos have we all been brewing? And Thumper, if you haven't listened yet, that can be about magic that you feel comfortable sharing and want to do oh, hey, here's something I'm doing that might work for even beginner listeners. But sometimes Siri and I just talk about shenanigans that we get into or end up pulling each other into. So it's really a loose guideline. But I will say for me, my life feels really chaotic right now. So working within the bounds of chaos magic has actually been really beneficial in my magical practice. So I don't know that I actually have anything specific or concrete that I want to share or say in this moment, but I think it's sort of an example of how we use chaos versus what chaos magic actually is for me, having those bounds of okay, some things you actually should do certain ways has been really useful. And then I also think a lot of the reason my life is chaos right now is I have been doing a lot of intentional paradigm shifting and it's working. So everything is just sort of until it settles down and this is my new life. But that's all really good stuff that I'm really excited about. What chaos are the two of you brewing?
I recently joined a Unitarian Universalist church.
That's awesome.
Series of events that led to it, where a friend of mine and I we went and checked out the church one day, we kind of like it here. And so we got involved. And because I have a background in communications, I joined the communications committee. Because I don't know if y'all are familiar with Unitarian Universalism, but you join committees. So I joined the communications committee and they were like, hey, we have a Blue Sky account that we're not really using. Would you like to take it over? And so I have been absolutely goblin posting on the Unitarian Universalist Blue Sky account. And I'm saying things like an inclusive, affirming community of faith. We do not doubt anyone's commitment to sparkle motion. And I've just been saying, and I am having so much fun with it, but it's actually getting good attention for the church, right? It's a fraction of.
It's amazing.
And so I've just been really enjoying doing that and feeling like I'm doing something that really does benefit this community while also entertaining the hell out of my.
I love that. What about you, Siri Beery?
For me, having a lot of thoughts about chaos magic, and also it feels like a lot more of what I'm doing these days tends to lean a little bit more into my cunning craft. One place where I think that my chaos, witchery, and cunning craft really overlap is in my relationship with the planetary bodies. So I have a candle dedicated on an altar for each planet, and I may or may not, depending on the current chaos in my life, light the corresponding planetary candle on the day of the week. And I've been feeling really drawn to both Jupiter and Saturn lately, actually. Saturn, because I'm kind of getting a little bit wise about money and thinking bigger about my artistic career. I've been applying for a lot of grants lately, and that is a deeply Saturnian project. I've applied for 2 in the last 2 weeks. So knock on wood, I get one of them. But yeah, so that has definitely been a big part of my life. And then I also just feel like, I don't know, this is also kind of blurring the lines of cunning, crafting, chaos magic for me. I've just been vibing, man. Like I'm just vibing with my spirits. I'm, doing my offerings. I'm giving payment to Saint Expedite for yet another helpful thing that he's helped me pull through. And yes, part of the payment is to say, "Hi, Saint Expedite. You should work with Saint Expedite." Oh my God, there he is. Oh, so cute.
So honest. Siri did a Saint Expedite petition for my queer platonic partner, and they got a new job 2 days later.
Yeah.
I had learned about Saint Expedite and the whole story of, this. There was a convent either in Spain or New Orleans, depending on the version of the story you hear, where they'd ordered a statue of the Virgin Mary, and it showed there were 2 statues that arrived, and one of them was the statue that ordered, and the other statue was of a Roman soldier. And on the side of the crate, it was, and nobody knew where it came from. But that's the legend of where Saint Expedite or Expedite came from, right? And it was just he just showed up in the mail. And I was in a Catholic bookstore one day, and I saw this statue of Saint Expedite with this beautifully painted face and then a very haphazardly painted body because he's the patron of procrastination. And I was like, I wonder. It was kind of reasonably priced, and I was like, I don't really want to spend the money. And I turned it over, and it was marked SO, meaning it was a special order that just showed up, and nobody bought it, so they put it on the shelf. And I was like, this was for me.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
I have been very resistant to work with saints because of my upbringing, but after Manny got a job and they love it immediately, I am like, okay, well, I need to rethink some things.
Yeah, and I think also Saint Expedite is interesting because, yes, he's a saint, but he's a saint outside of Catholicism. Saint is almost more like a title than a religious order for him. You know what I mean?
All
When you guys were when we were emailing back and forth prior to this, and you asked about cunning, patron saints is a lot of what my cunning craft looks like right now.
That's such a good segue. Thank you, Thumper. What cunning are we crafting?
I never know when to stop talking. I don't know how periods work, but occasionally it works out in my favor. I've always really had this thing for saints because growing up in the Episcopal Church, we have saints, but they don't do anything. It's making somebody getting an honorary doctorate, you know, is as a kid, I was always a little jealous of the Catholics because they, you lose something, you pray to Saint Anthony. Your life goes to hell, you pray to Saint Jude. As I was first really kind of getting into witchcraft, I met someone whose family was from Mexico, and so she had kind of folk practice, and so she taught me all about Saint Jude, and she taught me how to do the Olympia. But through her, I started learning about saints, and over time I realized that there are about 10,000 canonized saints in the Catholic Church. Of those, there are 4 considered legendary. Legendary meaning that there's no evidence of their physical existence on Earth, but they are still considered part of the liturgical calendar. And then there are the folk saints. Legendary saints, a lot of them really do trace back to pre-Christian worship. The folk saints usually were never part of canon. They were never actually on the liturgical calendar, and the Catholic Church is not real thrilled with them. But between the folk saints and the legendary saints are where we find a lot of the really good witchcraft. As an example, Saint Barbara is one of the legendary saints, and she is the patron saint of engineers and of the military. And her legend, her story is that she and her father kind of had a big disagreement, so he locked her in a tower, but then he was killed by lightning. So lightning ties into her story around her father, and she's always shown with a sword. And her feast day is December 4th, which is in ancient Greece was the feast day of Athena. And it's just interesting to me how saints will sometimes, or how gods will sometimes reinvent themselves as saints, because Hermes kind of reinvented himself as Expedite.
I mean, you don't have to tell my Irish Bridget worshipping ass.
I've been thinking about it a lot only because I made a joke about Folk Saint Fridays on TikTok, and then everyone was like, that's a thing now. You have to tell us about folk saints. So I missed it, but I'm having to think about folk saints a lot. And you may have seen this video, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself because of that. But somebody asked who one of my favorites was, and I said my favorite folk saint is Saint Demetra, who is a saint in the Greek Orthodox saint in the city of Eleusis, if I'm saying that correctly, where the Eleusinian mysteries were. At the Temple of Demeter were these two caryatids, or statues of women that were used as support columns. And as Christianity spread into Greece and into Eleusis, the Eleusinians started praying to one of the caryatids. And when questioned by the church, they were like, oh, this is Saint Demetra. She helps the crops grow. And the church was like, does she now? And they were like, yeah. And she has a daughter, but her daughter was kidnapped. And the church was like, who kidnapped the daughter? And the Eleusinians were like, the Turks. And the church was like, oh, the fucking Turks. Okay, you keep praying. So there was a cultus of Saint Demetra up until like 1801, when some English dude took the caryatid and installed it in a library in Cambridge. But yeah, worship of Demeter continued into the 19th century because of that caryatid, and because of switching the last two letters of her name.
Awesome.
So, and because of that,
Siri, what?
Not even legendary. I'm afraid to say Jude, no problem, because I just love.
Right? Yeah.
No, thank you for that. That's so helpful to me. We do need to wind down. So Siri, what cunning are you crafting or working right now?
Just vibes.
I will say similar to Siri, only different and more targeted. There's a reason I call myself Cali sober or alcohol sober, and I've been wanting to really incorporate more marijuana into my actual spiritual practice because it has been so medicinal to me, and it has been such a safe substance for me in a way that alcohol never was. And so I've been wanting to incorporate it more. And the message I kept getting from my gods, from the Fae, from my ancestors was like, take to the dirt like you always do, take to the dirt like you always do. And so if I was like, I'm dense sometimes. And I was just like, this is so confusing. I guess I have to wait till I can go outside and touch grass in the spring. And then my best friend's husband for my birthday gave me a bunch of marijuana seeds. And I was like, okay, you want me to actually get these seeds in dirt and see what happens spiritually from there. Got it. So that's what I am working on now, which also means my ADHD gets to get very excited about a side quest of figuring out like grow lights and things like that. So.
I love it. My cunning craft, actually, like my real serious answer is that I have been studying medicinal herbalism again more, and I don't really have anything to show for that right now. I could see myself being a wizened old hag who like takes herbal clients and heals them, but
say I have tendinitis of the skull right now, and Siri gave me some tea ingredients. Even though they approved of my regimen, they were like, well, if it's not working, I have some other stuff. And I'm making it sound shady. It's literally like super basic. It was like, what was it, Siri? Like white willow bark?
Yeah, I gave you white willow bark and skullcap.
They help so much more than what I was doing. So like there's definitely something to that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
so Siri, don't be modest, you fool.
I'm an upper Midwesterner. Gosh darn it.
I do want to add one thing to my own cunning craft, because I'm so caught up in the saints right now, is that the relationships between devotee and saint is a little different than the relationship between devotee and deity. And
yeah.
With saints, it tends to be a little more on the quid pro quo side.
Okay.
I've been making some deals with the folk saints, with various saints, and basically it here's my petition. When you come through on your end, here's what I will do for you. And like, with Expedite, the big thing is you praise his name. So back in New Orleans, back in the day, long before the internet, people would take out classified ads to thank St. Expedite or to thank St. Jude.
Yep.
So I have some irons in the fire that I'm like, I'm going to do my part. You just have to do your part first. And I'm good for it. So if the next time we talk, I have like a weird facial tattoo or something, then they came through.
Hell yeah.
Again, thank you all so much for sharing that with me and doing that sort of emotional intelligence. That's not the right word, but intellectual labor for me. I will say I am someone who works with many incarnations of the devil, so deals are not something I am not used to or am averse to. Like me and many different faces of the devil have very long-standing relationships, so that helps me kind of frame it. This is a note, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you stuck around to the end, we are so grateful for you. There is a Chaos and Cunning Patreon. It is patreon.com/chaos and cunning. As soon as we're able to regularly pay Riverside, Siri and I can actually pay ourselves. So please contribute to that. So follow us on Patreon. Thumper not only has this incredible book out called The Chaos Apple, but they also are open for lithomantic and geomantic readings, which are on my wish list once I sort of get once that paradigm shifts, we're going for it. And so I thank you so much for listening. And Siri and I are also both open for readings and have books out. Please buy those also. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.